Hello, there's so many of us up on stage, almost as many of us as there are of you. But let me introduce, I'm Francine Stock, let me introduce from the end, Director of Animation, Pablo Grillo, Hugh Grant, Simon Farnby, who you will have seen, and also as co-writer, and the other writer and director, Paul King, and producer, David Heyman. So, Paul and Simon, as you wrote the film, let's talk a little bit about, first of all, about the source, because the first film was much more based perhaps on the stories, and this one you have ranged a little further abroad, is that right?
Yes, I think that's correct.
So Simon's looking to me for confirmation,
yes,
as if he genuinely wasn't there, and somehow put in an invoice and got away with it.
I know, it's hard to know where to start, really. I suppose we thought the first film was really about him finding a home, so we couldn't go through that thing of sort of, some evil developers have come and they're going to destroy his home, and so maybe that is a good idea. But no, so we thought, what is he, his place in the community we were more interested in, so that's how we got.
Yeah, we had this scene at the end of the first film where Paddington's having a sort of, he's playing in the snow, a snowball fight you might call it, but he's playing in the snow with the Brown family, and it was sort of Paddington and the rest of the family, and I remember, even when we were filming it, David and I were sort of saying to each other, it's a shame there's not more people here, because he feels like such a great sort of community figure, just as a shot. In sort of simple photographic terms, you go, well, there's quite a big street and quite a small number of people, and Paddington feels like a great community figure who brings people together and says hello to people, and we always loved that sense of him. And so Simon and I sort of started talking about that and going, well, can we bring Paddington into the community, and sort of where does that take us? And then we started thinking about kind of Frank Capra films, especially the sort of pre-war classics of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and Mr. Deeds Goes to Town and Meet John Doe, and those films where sort of the little guy, often from a small town, goes to the big cynical city. And so we started thinking about Paddington as one of those heroes, and actually it's quite a good model for Paddington, because he's not a kind of classically flawed hero. He's a good bear with decent values who doesn't need to kind of kick his marmalade habit in order to solve the case. He's just a good bear. And we thought, well, is there a shape of a movie where Paddington has his values tested by society, and then the sort of story began to come together.
We had the idea quite early on that his good deeds in the community would, whatever we put him through in the second act, and the idea of prison sort of came to us as part of that was, but at the end, the community, no matter what we put him through, the community at the end would remember or hold on to this little, bear that had done them all little tiny acts of kindness, and that they would repay him in some sort of big way, which they do with Aunt Lucy.
Yeah, and a lack of sense of confidence in his own value, I suppose. That was another thing that we were thinking, and again, that was a sort of slight Frank Capra thing. We sort of thought about George in It's a Wonderful Life, and how he doesn't recognise the value of his own life. I mean, it's a very, very different story, obviously.
He's very sort of, me, I don't do anything.
Yeah.
What do I do? And we struck us that was quite a sort of Paddingtonian.
Yeah, that he doesn't recognise his own value and these tiny acts of kindness being actually tremendously important glue that holds society together.
And at what stage did you come up with the antagonist? What stage did Hugh's character come along?
This character came along, he was fairly early on as well. There's a story actually where Paddington goes to the theatre for the first time, and he doesn't realise that it's all pretend, so he gets very angry with the villain and goes backstage at half-time and tells the actor off for being terribly naughty and horrible to everybody. And so we thought that was a very nice sort of... And Paddington's always coming across sort of these high-status figures or pompous figures. So this idea of the actor came along. We actually, when we first came up with the name, he was called Hugh.
He was called Hugh Grant for a long time.
He was actually called Hugh Grant.
We just changed it in the credits. I don't know what it is about Hugh that made us think of this handsome, charming narcissist.
Over the hill.
And Hugh, was it apparent to you as soon as you saw the script that you had to be there?
It came with a letter saying, we've written a part for a used to be famous over the hill egomaniac, and we thought of you. And it was very, very hurtful. And but I read the script anyway, because I needed the work. And no, it was marvelous. And you know, I've been acting for 30 years and have hated every single actor I've ever met. So it was lovely, really, to get my revenge on them all.
David, when a film has been Paddington, first Paddington, obviously a great success, and at that point, I mean, what are you as a producer thinking that you have to try if you're going to do a second film? What are the things you really have to bear in mind then?
Don't want to mess it up. You want to make a second film be better than the first, and you know, it's one of the things we talked about with Paul, and Paul and Simon have talked about it a little bit. You don't want to do a remake of the first film. You want to do something that's different. And, I think Paul and Simon did that. But then everybody who worked on it was as ambitious for it as Paul and I was, which is to make it better than the last.
And essential to all of that is the very kind of... Paddington is so soulful. He's a decent guy. He asks straight questions, but he has such feeling. There's such a sense of consciousness in Paddington. And that, I think, is probably in no small part down to you, Pablo. Is Paddington... obviously you did the first Paddington as well. In terms of animation, a greater challenge? I mean, a particular kind of challenge? What kind of challenge?
It's a huge kind of challenge because he's not your obvious character. I think the things we're sort of pulling from are sort of more delicate things that we take inspiration from yesteryear and the great classics, sort of wonderful performers like Chaplin, who have incredible sort of heart and humour and pathos. And I think it's a dream come true to be able to apply, see what we do with this incredible tool to something like that. And I think in animation it's very difficult. I think there are a lot of devices you can reach for in animation and sort of be very expressive, posing and sort of do very cliched things. And I think to sort of throw that away and go, okay, no, we're going to do something very instinctive, inscrutable, and sort of play with that something more animalistic in a way, something you don't read instantly, but you sort of measure through his reactions, through the actions, through the thought processes. It's you can start crafting a very articulate and very sort of gentle and subtle performance, and I think it's a wonderful treat to be able to do something like that in animation. But I think one of the huge challenges is also sort of making him believable. I think one of the very big and important decisions at the beginning of the history of these films is saying, okay, we're not going to go with the sort of usual cartoony, stylized things. Again, sort of those devices for the audience to invest. You need to believe in him. He needs to be grounded in the real world, be bear-like, have all the nuance of detail of fur and colour that you could totally buy into it and sort of forget about the technique, and he can belong. And so I think that sort of design, that process of discovering how to move him in the world, how his eyes should be. It's a huge challenge. It's the hardest type of animation that there is. So I think, an opportunity that we leap at, as artists, to be able to do something like that, so rich.
A couple of things feeding off that. I think the bear himself is slightly, it's such a strange notion, a bear in London who nobody particularly regards as a bear. So that's kind of a fantastic notion. So one of the things that Paul, from the very beginning, wanted to do was create a kind of heightened version of London so that the bear could come to London and London could come to the bear, or the design could come to the bear and the bear could come to the design. But we also had the benefit of some, a couple of great performers, Ben Whishaw and Javier Marzan. And Ben is the voice of Paddington, but also working with Paul and with Pablo, sort of, the performance is, at its root begins with Ben, his voice and his facial. They put cameras on it, but just to be clear, it's not motion capture. It's animators under Pablo's guidance and Paul's supervision as well, creating this performance that's inspired by Ben at its core.
Absolutely, it's an amalgam, and I think ultimately guided by Paul, sort of conducted by Paul, into a fused.
It's mostly me.
Performance.
Puppet master.
No, it absolutely isn't. It's an extraordinary privilege to work with these amazing people, and what Pablo does is absolutely exquisite. I mean, we've sort of all seen a lot of motion capture films and a lot of animation, and sometimes the animation seems very larger than life and cartoony, and sometimes I find the motion capture side of things, if it's not a kind of human character or a naturalistically human character, it can kind of start to feel slightly sort of uncanny and weird, like a kind of horse just is pulling human expressions or something. So Paddington is really incredibly crafted, and for me, one of the greatest pleasures of working on the film is working with these extraordinary animators. And there's this sort of terrible misconception that because things are sort of done in the computer, they're done by the computer, and you go, what you actually have is about 85 animators and 1,000 other people kind of working endless days, sort of trying to make this bear live and breathe. And the detail, he really sort of lives and dies by a million tiny choices. I mean, especially in something like the barber's shop, for example, that you sort of go, the fur, you sort of, even I, having done sort of 2 Paddington films, you sort of go, well, we do the animation and then they stick the fur on and it always looks great. And you go, but it's not nearly as simple as that. You go, but if the fur's doing anything extraordinary, like bouncing up and down in a believable, there's no kind of, you don't just hit F4 and hope for the best. It's kind of, it's sort of a ridiculously bespoke formula of how the ripple of movement moves through his muscles, that moves through his fur, that suddenly brings it to life. And literally for 10 months, it was the least funny and most horrifying scene you've ever seen. Sort of Paddington picks up this razor and looks like he's had an electric current shoved through him. It's absolutely horrific. And then in the last sort of couple of weeks, we found the right way of doing it, and they were able to roll it, but there was no guarantee that would ever happen. And I have to say, blowing Pablo's trumpet, that's not a terrible thing to do in this day and age, but there's an extraordinary shot where Paddington's lying in bed, and just before we have our Peru dream sequence, where this kind of solitary tear falls down his muzzle, and you sort of go, when you think about how 5 years ago fur was impossible and 10 years ago water was impossible, and you sort of go, just for that shot, and he's so still, and like it's the hardest thing to animate, when they're kind of all up and about and moving around, it's so easy, or comparatively easy, and when it's just stillness and being, you realise that's the sort of acting that someone like Ben Whishaw can do, because they're really incredibly world-class actors, but that most people would really struggle with. And that single shot to me is one of the most amazing visual effects shots I've ever seen in my life.
The highest compliment I can make is that at the premiere I took my 89-year-old father, and halfway through the film he turned to me and he said, "Is that a real bear?"
Well, that is the highest compliment, so thank him on my behalf.
He's senile.
Is it just the penny's finally dropped?
Now I'm going to open it up to some questions. There are a couple of roving microphones. There's one question right down the front immediately.
Hi, that was brilliant. I loved it. I'd loved it just as much, if not more, than the first one, so thank you. Just a question for Hugh. Were you particularly partial to any of the costumes, and have you kept any for special occasions?
Well, some of them were my costumes.
Only the nun.
I played a lot of lady parts. If you'll excuse the expression. When I was at school, it was an all-boys school. And the nun was one of them, and it's a costume I wear when I'm feeling sad.
A question for who? Have you ever done dog food commercials in your life?
Funnily enough, I've just been offered one. And, no, I'm too grand. I've never done a commercial. It's partly why I'm good casting for this, because I'm too narcissistic. I think, oh, no, darling, film star, don't do that. But I wish I had. I'd have made lots more money.
This is a question for all the people who made it, not actors, but it can go for actors. Do you think you achieved all you wanted to achieve in Paddington 2?
Good question.
Terrifically good question. I'm so caught between lying and lying in another way.
Can I just say that Paul King is still editing the first film in his head and re-editing it. I think one of the things that makes him the director that he is that he is always looking to make it better. And he, at the end of the process, the film is literally pulled from his hands because he would still be working on it today to make it better than it can be, better than it is. So to answer the question, I think as filmmakers, we always look for what we could do better, but try and enjoy what we've done.
As a writer, it's interesting because there's lots of jokes that you have that end up not being in the film. And there was one actually where we had Henry, when they stole the train, we had this thing where Henry's job was so boring that he could clear a room in 6 seconds. We had this sort of running joke. And it was one of our sort of favourite things, to answer your question. There's some things you go, that would have been a really good joke. And you go, I can clear a room in 6 seconds, my job's so boring. And it became his sort of, when they wanted to steal the train, they go, how are we going to get those 2 drivers out of the cabin of the train? We need someone who can get these guys out in 6 seconds. And then Henry goes, leave it to me. And then it cut to him. He comes in, he goes, all right, chaps, great train driving, isn't it? I'm in insurance myself. And started talking about his boring job. And then they go, just going to go and get my sandwiches. And they cleared off. So that was one. That's probably the only one that I go, that was a good joke. But what do you think? What do you reckon?
Quick reshoot.
The next one. There you go, Paul. We can go back. Director's cut.
I think the thing is that you get a sort of smell of what the film might be able to be, and it's a sort of lovely thing. And if you're directing, you sort of have quite a strange job because you work with all these people like Pablo who are so brilliant and designers and cameramen and actors and they can all entirely do their job without your help whatsoever. You're sort of there in an advisory capacity. And your job really as a director, I always think, is to try and hold on to the tone of the film or the smell of the film. So if you feel that Paddington, it's not quite set in the London that you see when you walk outside, and people don't behave quite like how people behave, and there's a talking bear in it, and there are sort of attitudes and a way people speak, and your job really is to help all the brilliant people that you work with understand what sort of a film it is you're trying to make. And I think with this film, we felt that we had a very strong sense of what that would be, that we'd found, and we really wanted to tell this story. And to say something nice about David, when we started doing a sequel, you asked about the sequel earlier, and it is a sort of terrible thing in the film industry that a film does well, and there's a kind of immediate, well, there'll be another one, right? And you sort of go, well, there isn't Taxi Driver 2, and I don't think worse of Scorsese for not having done. This time he's driving a limo. It's a good thing. And one of the nice things that David said when we started working on it was, we'll give it 6 months, and if you think you have a story and a film that's worth making, then we'll make it. And if you don't, we'll forget about it and walk away. David is lucky that he has many a billion-dollar franchise in his back pocket. I need to work. So I managed to convince him we had a film worth making. But we did find we did feel that we found a film that was worth making and a tone that we wanted to hold on to and a story that we wanted to hold on to. And sometimes you feel you've got all of the way there, and sometimes you think you've got 3/4 of the way there, and the battle is to sort of try and keep it all in that world. And of course, there are bits where I would probably have done something different, or I'd like to have another go. We could still reshoot, I really think, before the DVD comes out. But what I do feel,
joking.
what I do feel, and you feel when you watch it with an audience, is that people go with it emotionally. And there's something, for me, the most satisfying thing is hearing the audience react at the end of the film, and you go, well, do you know what? I think we got you there, and that's a very, very special feeling. And then I think maybe it's okay.
obviously been up for ages back there, so we could. Can we just
How long did the film take to make?
It was 2.5 years from the day we started writing to the day it came out, almost exactly.
Which is actually, in film terms, relatively short, because sometimes you develop a project, work on, start writing, and it can take. I mean, I've got some films I've been working on for 10 years and still aren't made. May never get made. Maybe shouldn't get made.
I've got a question for the actors. When you're working with the bear, how do you visualise that it's there? Because it's obviously not there on set.
Do you think you count as an actor? I suppose you do.
It's a bit like... I'm part-time actor. It's a bit like working with me, isn't it? Working with Paddington, just nothing there.
It was better working with Paddington, to be honest. No, it's true. It's very difficult. There's nothing there. There's a stick, and on good days they give you a stick with a bear's head on the top. Which is one of the most frightening things you've ever seen in your life. It's like a warning to bears to stay out of the region. So, it's not easy. You have to make it up.
And I think you also the thing that's really tough, I think, for some people is that because there's nothing there to bounce off, and you really are relying on your performers to be not only really good at delivering their own performance but holding in their head what the bear's going to be doing, especially in comedy where you go, it's all about chemistry and about interaction, and you sort of go, there aren't a huge number of particularly funny films with a digital character, and I think it's a really, really tricky thing to do, and we're hugely lucky to have had the incredibly skilled cast that we have who are able to do it, and Hugh is particularly wonderful.
It is amazing, because it might be hard to believe, but Paddington's quite hard to write in that he's not incredibly funny in himself. He talks quite politely, but when you put him up against people, like when we had the idea of putting him against Phoenix Buchanan and Brendan as well, you imagine that they make him funny, their sort of chemistry, as Paul said, makes Paddington. Suddenly you're laughing at Paddington, and it's an amazing thing for an actor to give that to another actor, but to give it to something that's not even there is really amazing.
I think it's a weird process for everybody on the set, really, because, sometimes there's nothing there at all, and the poor cameraman, you're telling, well, he's walking across there, and he's going, and the move is going like this, and everyone's like, well, was it? I don't know, is that the right cameraman?
Was that good? There was literally nothing.
There's nothing
in
there,
the
and it's very jarring, but I think, people get into the swing of it as well after a while.
It's also interesting in the post-production. I mean, it's also, for Paul, editing the film. You're often, for a big portion of the film, you're editing with nothing there. Then you're editing with a grayscale, which is just a blob. Then you're editing with some preliminary animation. And to have the courage, to hold your nerve as it comes together. It's much easier, for example, with visual effects, to cut them down a shot, to edit a shot, to make a shot shorter than it is to make it longer. If you have to make it longer, you have to start from scratch. Making it shorter, you can edit it down. But of course, that comes with a cost, because every shot is expensive. But the nerve that Paul, in particular, and his editors have to have in shaping it, when a big part of what is going to make a scene or a sequence work is not there.
Can you shout?
Just a question for Hugh. Do you prefer acting in comedies or in dramas?
Well, I can't really do dramas. I've tried, and it's
I was trying to think of it. Have you done any dramas?
I'm trying to do one now, and everyone's in tears, actually, and just despair. So I think, yes, it has to be. It has to be comedies. But even then, I don't find it easy. I'm very neurotic and full of anxiety.
I think you did quite well.
Well, the annoying thing about Paul with a comedy is that I've done a lot of comedies, oddly enough, with directors who have no sense of humour at all. And it's rather nice, because you sort of do your thing and they laugh nervously at everything you do, because they haven't got a sense of humour. with Paul, not only does he have a perfect sense of humour, but he knows exactly which bit is funny, and then he'll do that very unnerving thing of saying, "Yeah, but you did a really good thing in the master shot on take 2, and you know you did, but now you can't repeat it," and so it was a very unhappy experience, the whole thing.
Hugh also writes a lot of his own lines. I mean, I have to fight the self-deprecation. That's my role here. But what Hugh brings to the part is enormous. And there's this line that I was talking about the other day, where in the court case, there's this sort of court scene, and we decided we wanted to put Phoenix in it, and we'd written this Les Miserables joke, which we were sort of reasonably thought was quite funny for about 9 people. But we sort of thought, we'd sort of so the guy goes, "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" And we wrote, "Solemnly, I do." We thought it was just quite pompous. And the prisoners no laughing matter. I spent 3 years in Les Miserables, and we were sort of okay with that. And then on take 6, Hugh went, "Yeah, there's something I might try," in a sort of very quiet way. And you kind of slightly your heart, begins to race as you go, "Well, I hope it's good, because we haven't got that many more takes, and I don't really want to waste one of your ideas." And then suddenly he goes, "May my entrails be plucked forth and wound about my neck, should I deceive. I do." And you go, "Well, that's what you want." That's amazing. And that's how he improvises.
My question was about the musical number at the end, which is just genius. And I wondered, was it something you thought of first of all, or did it come later? Why you did it, when you did it, how Hugh found doing it, because it was fabulous.
We'll come to Hugh in a minute. But it was actually that we were going to do a play. I think we were going to do Hamlet at one point. Or we were going to, and then when he became more of a musical actor, we had this idea he was going to do the song. And I just kept doing, as often we do when we're writing, I go, what if he does this? And I'll get up and try and act it out. And the only song I knew, which is the only song I've ever done in a musical myself at drama school, was this Rain on the Roof. And I go, what if he's in a prison at the end and this light comes on and he goes, "Listen to the rain on the roof, go pit-pitty-pat." And Paul would always go, at one point after a few weeks, he goes, "What the hell is that song?"
I know, because I just thought you made it up. I mean, I didn't know
Sounds
Follies.
made up,
Who
yeah.
knows Follies? That's like a pretty obscure... Well, now they do, obviously, because Imelda Staunton's gone and casually made it a smash. But no one knows Follies. I mean, I even, Sondheim, and I didn't know it. And Simon kept doing this, and I thought it was just an example of the worst possible musical song, not a masterpiece written by a genius, which I'm now reliably informed it is. And obviously, in the context of Follies, it's a very different song. And I just thought it was really funny, but I couldn't find it and didn't know what it was. And it's really only about 50 seconds of song. There's not very much there. But then once we'd written the scene with Mary and Phoenix, it felt like that needed to be what was at the end, and it felt like it would be really good fun to do a big, silly musical number. And but because of the terrible way schedules work, it ended up being Hugh's first day on set.
Baptism of fire.
And it was an 18-hour day. It was...
Yeah. And you were... how did you find the dancing?
Well, I remember saying, I think it's a good idea, as long as it's not too camp. And luckily it wasn't, was it?
No.
Very tasteful, I
Just
thought.
the right side of camp.
But it's also a thing where he did an extraordinary... It's one of those tricky things where you do just... Because you sort of want... we really wanted Hugh to play the role and sort of... So you don't kick off with, by the way, we'll start with an 18-hour day with you doing a song and dance number. And I'm not 100% sure it was even in the script when you started. It might have been just there, but it was sort of, there's a big song and dance number. It was never sort of detailed with, choreography and stuff. And so then you sort of slowly begin to realise it, and that you're going to have to say, this terrible things happen where we're going to have to start with the end of the film, which is tricky, and sort of doing this thing. And Hugh did singing lessons and dancing lessons and all sorts of things, and they didn't have a huge amount of impact.
I did so much of that. I was in such a panic about where to put my feet that I forgot to make a character, really. And And I did the whole scene really, a lot of the dances completely out of character. And certainly the voice was. And we went back and we dubbed it later. I really only got into him a few weeks later. So the whole voice is dubbed. But I shouldn't admit to these flaws.
That was a terrible...
Nobody would have known.
It's dubbed by Hugh, I have to say. Yeah, we didn't record it live.
Well, I think we're just about out of time now. But I'm so sorry. There's another hand.
This is for Hugh. In Paddington 2, what was your favourite scene that you shot?
Well, I think it comes back to the same old thing. I like to dress as a woman. And so I was very happy as Sister Isabella. I think that was my favourite. I think so.
There's one little girl there who's just had a hand up for ages. Can we get one more?
Go on.
This is for you. Do you enjoy playing the villain?
Well, enjoy is never the word with me, because as I said earlier, I'm rather anxious, and I like to make everyone around me anxious and unhappy as well. And I think I achieved that on the set. But I am quite happy with the way it's turned out, because I also tend to hate the films I've been in. And I really can't... I actually like this film. It's most unusual for me. It's
Did you watch this with your children? You watched this with your children?
I did. I watched it with one so far, and he hated it. All he said all the way through is, "Why is Daddy in it so much?"
So he didn't hate the film. He hated
No, it was just you.
specifically in the film.
Yeah, that's okay.
He went, that security guard was wonderful.
He wrote to Simon for an autograph.
A proper actor for once.
I liked him in Horrible Histories.
And the direction.
Yes, the direction. And the animation.
I think he's right on the edge. How old are you? You're like 11?
I'm really 12.
Yeah. That was a damn good guess.
That is 11, isn't it? I mean, if we're going to be honest.
And he's 5, and he had terrible nightmares. Drowning bear. I mean, it's sick stuff.
Well, look, thank you very much up there and everywhere else for all your questions, but particularly on the stage to Pablo, to Hugh, to Simon, Paul, and David. Thank you for your publicity.
Thank you. Thank you very much.